The first thing I saw that morning was the sign. A crooked whiteboard, its edges splintered from years of use, jammed into the dirt by the driveway. In thick red letters still dripping from the brush, it screamed, "For sale." And underneath, in his handwriting, the phone number. His number. Not mine. Some secrets are buried for years, until betrayal drags them into the light. Watch this story to the very end. Every second builds toward a moment you'll never forget. For a moment I stood still on the porch, clutching my robe tighter against the chill. The air smelled of wet leaves, the kind that stick to your shoes in late October, and I could hear the faint hum of a neighbor's mower down the street. Life was carrying on as usual. But for me nothing was usual. My boat, my one piece of freedom, had been marked for auction like some broken chair left at a garage sale. I didn't storm forward. I didn't scream. Instead I let out a breath, slow and measured. Come. He had done it without asking. Without even mentioning it. That told me more than his silence ever could. And I knew deep down this wasn't a mistake. This was a message. I walked down the steps, my slippers crunching on the gravel, each step pulling me closer to the sign like a magnet. The closer I got, the louder my heart thudded, though my face stayed composed. Neighbors were out. Mr. Jenkins with his paper tucked under his arm, the Reynolds boy pedaling by on his rusty bike. Their eyes drifted toward the sign, then toward me, then away again. Curious but too polite to ask. I brushed my hand over the board. The paint was still tacky. Fresh. Which meant he'd done it early this morning before I'd woken up. Deliberate. Quiet. Sneaky. And there he was, leaning against the fence post with that careless posture he always used when he wanted to look in control. His arms folded, a smirk ghosting across his lips. As if he'd been waiting for me to see it. "You're up early," I said, my voice steady, as if I hadn't just found my trust shattered in the yard. He shrugged. "Figured it was time to get rid of that thing. Just sits there collecting dust. Someone else could make use of it." "That thing?" I repeated softly, tilting my head. "You mean my boat?" His smirk deepened. He didn't correct me. Didn't even blink. That silence told me everything I needed to know. In his mind it wasn't mine anymore. I wanted to laugh. The kind of sharp, bitter laugh that rises when anger and disbelief collide. But instead I pressed my lips together, keeping it inside. My calm was my weapon, sharper than any blade. Because what he didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask, was that boat wasn't just sitting there by chance. That boat was a secret stitched into my bones. I had paid for it. Me. Not with spare change or hidden bills from grocery money. No. With something far heavier, far riskier. Something he would never have dared touch. But I didn't tell him. Not yet. Secrets are like nails in a coffin. You drive them in one at a time. And when the lid finally closes, the silence is deafening. Instead, I let my eyes wander past him across the yard to the boat itself. Faded blue paint. Scratches along the hull. The tarp half pulled back, swaying in the cool wind. To anyone else it looked like an old, tired vessel. To me it was a promise I'd made to myself. A reminder that freedom wasn't gone, just waiting. The breeze picked up, carrying the faint scent of gasoline from somewhere down the street. A dog barked, then went quiet. Time seemed to stretch, slow, each second punctuated by the hammering in my chest. "Without asking me," I said finally, running my fingers along the edge of the sign again. My tone wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was sharper for its quietness. "You didn't need to be asked," he replied, casual, dismissive. "It's just taking space. And you've got no use for it. Might as well get a good price before winter." I studied him carefully. His face had aged, lines cutting deeper around the eyes, hair thinner than last year. But his arrogance, that stayed young. He still believed the world bent to his decisions. He still believed I would nod along like I always had. And that was his mistake. A car slowed at the curb. A woman I recognized, Nancy from 2 houses over, craned her neck, eyeing the sign. Her window rolled down halfway before she caught sight of me standing there. Her smile flickered nervously and she drove on. The shame pressed hot against my skin, but not mine. His. Except he couldn't feel it. "Not yet. You didn't even talk to me first," I said, my voice dipping lower, edged with steel. "After everything." He sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "Don't start, Margaret. It's just a boat. It's not like you ever take it out. It's been sitting there since." He cut himself off, waving a hand. "Doesn't matter." Point is, it's time to move on. Move on. The words clung to me cold and heavy. I thought of nights when moving on wasn't an option. Nights when I had counted pennies, balanced checkbooks, made choices he never even noticed. Nights when I had quietly sacrificed pieces of myself just to keep him comfortable. And now he told me to move on? From the one thing that was mine? I tightened my grip on the robe's belt, forcing my breathing steady. A plan was already knitting itself together in the back of my mind, threads of memory and resolve weaving tighter with every passing second. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that he wasn't the only one who could play this game. The hidden advantage was mine. And I'd held it for over a year, tucked away under layers of silence. I had signed the papers. I had made the payments. That boat wasn't just parked in my yard, it was anchored in my blood. But he didn't need to know that yet. Not until the moment it would cut deepest. I let the pause stretch long enough that he shifted uneasily on his feet. A rare crack in his confidence. Good. Let him squirm. Finally, I stepped closer until the sign was between us like a barrier. My eyes met his, steady, unflinching. You really think you can sell it without me knowing? I asked quietly. I don't need your permission, he shot back, though his voice wasn't quite as firm as before. I smiled then, not a warm smile but the kind that carries a storm behind it. Maybe you don't, I said softly. But you should have asked. You should have thought twice. The wind tugged at the tarp again, flapping it loudly, filling the silence between us. Somewhere down the street, the mower stopped and the sudden quiet made everything sharper, louder. He looked at me like he was waiting for me to back down. I looked at him like I was already 3 steps ahead. And neither of us moved. Finally, I stepped back, loosened my grip on the robe's belt and turned toward the house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I let the weight of my quiet footsteps be the answer. Sometimes silence carries more threat than shouting ever could. Inside, the smell of stale coffee lingered from yesterday's pot. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and sharp, louder than usual. I pressed my palm against the cool countertop, my breath tight in my chest. He thought he could sell that boat without asking. He thought he could erase me from the story of my own sacrifice. But the truth lived here. In this house, in these walls, in the papers I had hidden away years ago. Papers he had never seen, never cared to look for. I went to the back bedroom, the one he never bothered entering except when he needed to drag out the old fan in summer. The floorboards creaked under my slippers as I knelt beside the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from memory. The chest smelled faintly of lavender. The last sachet I had tucked inside had long since gone brittle, but the scent clung. I lifted the lid, the hinges groaning like old bones, and reached under the quilt stacked neatly on top. There it was. The worn shoebox taped shut along the edges, the cardboard soft from years of storage. I slid it out slowly, careful not to tear the corners. The air shifted as though the room itself recognized the weight of what I was about to revisit. Inside that box lived the truth of what I had done. I set it gently on the bed and peeled away the tape. The flap gave way and the stack of envelopes greeted me like old ghosts. Bank slips, mortgage agreements, letters with neat stamps across the top. Each one carried a piece of my silence, stitched together into a sacrifice I had never spoken of. I picked up the first envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. My handwriting stretched across the lines, tight, deliberate, holding back the fear I'd felt that night. It had been raining that evening. I remembered the sound of the drops beating against the kitchen window, steady as a drum. He had gone to bed early, the weight of his failures already pressing him into sleep. And I had sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the mortgage papers under the weak light of the lamp. The pen had felt heavy in my hand. Signing meant risk. It meant putting everything I had, everything I'd earned, on the line. But it also meant saving him. Saving us. I swallowed hard, the memory tightening my throat. He had never asked me to do it. That was the cruelest part. He hadn't even considered that I might. He had complained, yes, cursed at his luck, shouted about his bad fortune, but he had never looked at me as someone capable of carrying the weight. To him I was just background noise. Yet it was me who saved him. Me who mortgaged my house. My inheritance, the only piece of security left from my parents. He slept peacefully that night while I bled myself dry in silence. I slid the envelope back into the box and pressed my fingers against my eyes. The ache in my chest burned. For 18 months I'd carried this secret. Every bill paid, every check signed. Mine. And he never noticed. Or maybe he didn't care enough to notice. Either way, the truth sat here heavy and undeniable, waiting for the day I would finally speak it aloud. The floor creaked in the hallway. His steps, heavy and slow, drawing closer. I quickly shoved the papers back into the box, lowering the lid but not locking it. My hands rested on the smooth wood, calm on the outside, racing on the inside. Margaret. His voice carried from the doorway, casual but edged. You're awfully quiet in here. I looked up. He leaned against the frame, arms folded just as he had outside. Same smirk, same arrogance. Only now his eyes flickered briefly to the chest before darting back to me. Just looking for something, I said evenly. He narrowed his eyes but didn't press. Well, don't stew about the boat. It's for the best. You'll see. I gave a faint smile, the kind that could mean anything. He didn't deserve more than that. After he walked away, I sat back on the bed, the box beside me. I ran my hand over the lid, tracing the grain of the wood. Secrets, I thought, aren't always buried because we're afraid. Sometimes we bury them because timing is everything. And my timing wasn't yet. I placed the box back under the quilts, careful to cover it neatly. To anyone else it looked like nothing more than blankets folded for winter. But I knew better. I could feel the truth humming there like a hidden current, ready to spark when the moment came. Later that afternoon I tried to keep myself busy. I washed the dishes, though there were hardly any. I watered the plants by the window, their leaves drooping with the change of season. I even pulled out a loaf of bread to knead, pressing the dough under my palms until the stickiness gave way to something smooth. But no matter what I did, my eyes kept drifting toward the back bedroom. Toward the box. Toward the secrets I had carried for far too long. At one point the phone rang. A short, sharp trill that cut through the house. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. Hello. Hi there, a man's voice said, polite, unfamiliar. Calling about the boat listed for sale. Still available? My heart clenched. My lips went dry. I glanced toward the yard where the sign still stood crooked in the dirt. Yes, I managed after a pause, though my voice sounded far away. It's still here. When I hung up, the room felt smaller, tighter. The betrayal was no longer just an idea. It was happening. It was real. That night, as the sky darkened and the air turned sharp with autumn cold, I sat at the kitchen table again. Not with papers this time, but with memories. Every sacrifice, every silent choice, replayed itself in my mind like a reel I couldn't stop. He thought the boat was his to sell. He thought it was just an object, a burden, something to discard. But for me it was proof. Proof of what I had given, proof of what he had taken, proof of the power I had kept hidden all along. And I realized as I sat there with the shadows stretching long across the room, that keeping those secrets buried had protected him all these months. Protected him from the truth. But protection has its limits. When I finally went to bed, he was already asleep. His breathing steady, his arm thrown across the blanket as if nothing weighed on him at all. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, my mind humming like the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The secrets pressed against me, restless, itching to break free. And I knew sooner or later they would. I turned onto my side, eyes open in the dark, and whispered to myself. He has no idea what's coming. I lay in the dark, listening to his steady breathing beside me, and repeated the words in my mind like a quiet vow. By morning I was ready. When the sun slid through the curtains in thin, pale stripes, I pulled myself out of bed before him. My body ached the way it always did, stiff knees, tired shoulders, but inside me something was sharper than ever. I brewed coffee, the rich smell curling through the kitchen, and sat at the table with my hands wrapped around the mug. My heart was steady now. My anger wasn't wild anymore. It was focused. He walked in not long after, scratching his head, his robe hanging loose. Smells good, he muttered as though nothing had happened yesterday. As though he hadn't planted a sign in our yard declaring my boat for sale. I studied him carefully. Every wrinkle, every twitch of his mouth. He still thought he was untouchable. Still thought I'd swallow his decisions whole like I always had. But I had buried my silence long enough. After breakfast, I waited until he settled into his chair by the window with the paper. That was his ritual. The crossword, the sports page, a muttered comment or two about politics. Predictable as the clock ticking on the wall. That's when I spoke. The boat isn't yours to sell, I said. His head jerked up, eyes narrowing over the rim of his glasses. For a second he looked surprised, then amused. "Oh, we're still on that?" "Yes," I said, my voice flat, my hands steady on the table. "We are." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Margaret, you don't even use it." "Haven't for years. It's nothing but an eyesore out there." "It's not yours," I repeated. And this time I let the words drop heavier. The smile faltered. His eyes narrowed further, searching my face for something. He lowered the paper slowly, setting it on the armrest. "What exactly are you saying?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but unyielding. "That boat is mine. You don't get to decide what happens to it." A long silence stretched. He tapped his fingers on the arm of the chair a little faster than usual. That was the first crack. "Not in the boat. Not in me. In him." He didn't like when I pushed back. "Not this way." The phone rang, sharp and sudden. He stood quickly, almost too quickly, and grabbed the receiver. "Hello." His tone brightened, eager. After a pause, he glanced at me, then turned his body away. "Yes, it's still available. No issues. Runs fine. You can come take a look this weekend." My stomach clenched. So he had been planning this, making calls, arranging things behind my back. I stood slowly, walked to the sink, and let the water run over my hands, too hot at first, then cooling. I didn't interrupt him. "Not yet." Instead I listened. When he hung up, I dried my hands and turned. "You've been talking to buyers already." His jaw tightened. "Of course. You think I put up a sign for fun?" I stepped closer. My heart was racing, but my voice stayed quiet, even. "I told you. That boat isn't yours to sell." He laughed again, but this time it was hollow, strained. "And I told you, Margaret, stop making a scene over nothing." "Nothing?" I asked softly. The room fell heavy. His smirk didn't reach his eyes anymore. He knew something had shifted. I didn't say more. "Not yet." I left him standing there, pretending he had won, while inside I felt the first real taste of victory. Later that afternoon I took a walk to clear my head. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Leaves crunched under my shoes, and the distant hum of traffic reminded me how small our battles were in the grand scheme of the world. But small or not, this one mattered. I passed Mrs. Carter's house and she waved from her porch. "Saw that sign out front," she called. "Didn't know you were selling the boat." I forced a polite smile. "We're not," I said simply, then kept walking. Her brows knit together, but she didn't ask more. Still, I could feel her eyes on my back, curiosity buzzing like a swarm of bees. Word would spread. It always did. And maybe that wasn't a bad thing. When I returned home, he was on the phone again. His voice carried from the living room, low and urgent. "Yes, Saturday works. Cash preferred. No, my wife won't be a problem." That last line hit me like a cold blade. He had written me out of the picture entirely, reducing me to a nuisance, an obstacle to brush aside. I stood in the hallway, unseen, listening. My fists clenched at my sides, nails biting into my palms. Every word he spoke dug the crack deeper. His kingdom of control, the one he had built on my silence, was starting to tremble. And he didn't even know it yet. That evening I decided to test him. At dinner I set the table as usual. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. He ate quickly, distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. Between bites I said casually, "I had a call earlier. Someone asking about the boat." His fork froze midair. He looked up, eyes sharp. "Who?" I shrugged lightly. "Didn't say. Just wanted to know if it was still for sale." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "And what did you tell them?" I smiled faintly, cutting into my food. "That it wasn't." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. He set his fork down slowly, deliberately. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low. "Neither should you," I replied. For the rest of the meal we didn't speak. The clink of cutlery on plates was the only sound. But under the surface something was shifting. His certainty was cracking. My resolve was hardening. That night, as he paced the living room making yet another call, I slipped into the back bedroom. I pulled the cedar chest open just enough to touch the shoebox, my fingers brushing the worn cardboard. The papers were still there. My proof. My shield. My weapon. I closed the lid, my heart steady. Timing was everything. And tonight wasn't the moment. But it was coming closer. When I returned to the kitchen, he hung up the phone abruptly as if caught. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one," he muttered too quickly. Another crack. I sat across from him, folding my hands on the table. "You really think you can sell it all without me standing in your way?" His eyes darted, then settled back on me. For the first time I saw doubt flicker there. Small but real. I didn't press further. Instead, I leaned back, letting silence speak for me again. Because silence, when timed right, is louder than any scream. And as the clock ticked on the wall, steady and relentless, I knew this was only the beginning. The first crack in his kingdom had opened. And soon it would split wide. I didn't need to wait long to see it happen. The next morning, the doorbell rang just as I was pouring coffee. The sound startled me, sharp and insistent, echoing through the quiet house. He shuffled in from the living room, robe tied loosely, irritation already clouding his face. When he opened the door, two men in plain suits stood on the porch. Their voices were clipped, their questions direct. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Overdue payments, missed deadlines, warnings that couldn't be ignored much longer. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to fuss with the coffee pot, but every syllable floated clear as glass. His voice, usually smooth, commanding, cracked with excuses, promises, half-lies. When he finally shut the door, he sagged against it, his shoulders bent in a way I'd never seen before. That was the first time I realized how fragile he truly was. And I'll admit, it felt good. 4 days after, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Sometimes it was creditors, other times old friends, checking in with voices that dripped with politeness but carried a sharp edge. I listened from the other room as his confidence thinned. His words got shorter, his tone more desperate. He began pacing in circles, muttering under his breath, snapping at little things. The remote left on the table. A spoon in the wrong drawer. Once he slammed a door so hard the frame rattled. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply set his dinner on the table, folded the laundry, kept the rhythm of the house steady while he unraveled inside it. He didn't know it, but every moment of calm from me was another reminder of how little control he had left. One afternoon I stepped outside to water the plants by the porch. Across the street, Mrs. Carter was raking leaves. She waved, but there was hesitation in it now, as though she wasn't sure if she should. Word spreads fast in neighborhoods like ours. "Everything all right over there?" she asked gently, voice carrying across the yard. I smiled faintly, adjusting the hose. "Just fine," I said. But her eyes lingered on me, skeptical. Then they shifted toward the crooked "for sale" sign still standing in the dirt. I could almost hear her thoughts. Why hasn't it sold yet? Why is he pushing so hard? I turned away before she could ask more. The air smelled of damp leaves, sharp and earthy. My hands shook only slightly as I gripped the hose, but inside I felt steady. The cracks were spreading and soon everyone would see them. The next blow came quietly, with an envelope slipped through the mail slot. I picked it up before he saw it, the weight of it familiar. Past due. I slid it under the pile of catalogs and set it on the counter. When he came in later, he sifted through the stack quickly, pulling out the letter. His face darkened as his eyes scanned the page. He crumpled it in his fist and tossed it into the trash, muttering curses. I stood nearby, wiping the counter slowly with a rag. "Bad news?" I asked, tone even. "Nothing I can't handle," he snapped. But his hands betrayed him. They shook when he reached for his glass of water. Piece by piece he was crumbling. Nights grew restless. He paced the living room long after midnight, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. Sometimes he sat in the dark, head in his hands, muttering to himself. I watched from the hallway once, the shadows cutting across his face. He looked smaller somehow, swallowed by his own silence. I should have felt pity. Maybe once I would have. But not anymore. Every sleepless night was one he had earned. Every crack in his armor was one I had been waiting to see. One evening he tried to reach for me, the way men do when they're desperate for reassurance. His hand brushed mine at the dinner table. "You've always stood by me," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. I didn't pull away, but I didn't meet his eyes either. "I have," I answered. "Nothing more." The pause stretched until he cleared his throat and returned to his plate. The meatloaf had gone cold between us. Another week passed and his so-called friends stopped visiting altogether. Men who once slapped his back, shared his whiskey, talked big about investments. Gone. He sat by the window in the evenings, staring out at the empty street like a man waiting for a parade that would never come. Meanwhile, the calls kept coming. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he let the phone ring until it fell silent. But the silence was worse. It filled the house, thick and heavy, pressing on every wall. I busied myself with small things, folding towels, knitting by the fire, clipping recipes from the paper. But I felt his eyes on me, often watching, measuring. As if he wondered whether I knew more than I let on. And I did. Oh, I did. The boat sat untouched in the yard, tarp pulled tighter now as the weather turned colder. No buyers had come despite his promises. Each morning he checked the phone, his irritation sharper when no one called. Once I caught him out there alone, standing beside the boat, staring at it like it had betrayed him too. His shoulders slumped, his jaw clenched. I almost wanted to laugh. He had tried to strip it from me, and now it mocked him with its stubborn presence. He kicked at the dirt, muttered something I couldn't hear, and stormed back inside. The crack widened further. The final sign came late one night when he thought I was asleep. I heard him in the study, rustling papers, opening drawers. His voice was low, urgent, speaking into the phone. "I just need more time," he whispered harshly. "I've got something I can sell. I'll make it right." My chest tightened. He was bargaining, begging, offering promises he couldn't keep. The man who once barked orders and strutted with pride was now reduced to whispers in the dark. I closed my eyes, listening, my heart pounding steady. Every word he spoke was another fracture, another piece of his kingdom falling into dust. And when he finally hung up, I knew. He was no longer the king of this house. He was just a man watching his walls collapse around him. And I was there to see every piece fall. He was no longer the king of this house. Just a man whispering bargains in the dark, clawing at walls already falling around him. And I was there, wide awake, listening. I rose quietly from the bed, my slippers brushing the floor like whispers of their own. The hallway stretched long and dim, the only light spilling faintly under the study door. His voice had gone silent now, replaced by the frantic shuffle of papers. When I pushed the door open, he jerked his head up. His face was pale, his eyes wild. For a heartbeat, we simply stared at one another. Then I stepped inside, carrying nothing but the calm I had sharpened over months. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. He cleared his throat, fumbling to close a drawer. "Nothing you need to worry about." I moved closer. The desk was scattered with bills, notices, contracts I hadn't seen in years. Overdue stamps screamed across the pages in red ink. The empire he had bragged about, guarded so fiercely, had already collapsed to dust under his hands. My eyes met his. "It's already over, isn't it?" He bristled. "Don't you start with me." But his voice cracked, thin as paper. That was when I knew the moment had come. I reached into my pocket and placed the envelope on the desk. The shoebox had been emptied earlier that day, its contents sorted carefully, one piece pulled out just for this night. The paper inside was folded neatly, its creases sharp with years of weight. He frowned. "What's this?" "Proof," I said. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "The mortgage agreement." My name signed across the bottom, steady and clear, while he had slept soundly in the next room years ago. He read it once, then again, his lips moving without sound. His eyes darted up, confusion mixing with fear. You did this?" "Yes," I answered. My voice didn't waver. "Not you. Not your friends. Me." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. He sank back in his chair, staring at the paper as though it were written in fire. "All this time," he muttered. "All this time," I confirmed. He pressed a hand to his forehead, groaning. "Why didn't you tell me?" I leaned forward, my palms flat on the desk. "Because you never would have listened. Because you never saw me as anything but a shadow in this house. Because you never thought I could hold it all together." His mouth opened, but no words came. I pulled another envelope from my pocket, smaller but heavier with meaning. A letter I'd written weeks ago when I'd finally grown tired of silence. "I spoke to the bank," I said, sliding it toward him. "Every payment, every cent. Mine. And I made sure of one more thing." He grabbed the letter, scanned it quickly, his face draining of color. You transferred it?" "Yes. To your name." His voice was sharp now, desperate. "To mine," I said. "Completely. Legally. Irrevocably." The words landed between us like stones. He pushed back from the desk, his chair scraping loud against the floor. You can't do this to me. That boat. That boat is mine, I cut in. Always was. And now so is everything tied to it. Every asset. Every account. He stared, his chest rising and falling fast. For the first time in years he looked small. Not intimidating. Not untouchable. Just small. You betrayed me, he whispered. I laughed then, short and bitter. Betrayed you? I saved you. I carried you. And you never even noticed. The phone rang suddenly, shrill and jarring. He jumped. I didn't move. He let it ring twice, 3 times before snatching it up. Hello. Does I know? No, I just need. His voice broke. Please. Just give me until next week. When he hung up, his hands were trembling so badly he could barely set the receiver down. I watched quietly, then said, They're not calling you anymore. They're calling to collect what's left. And there's nothing left. He shook his head, muttering, No, no, no. But I knew better. I had the proof. I had the power. That weekend a man arrived at the house. Not a friend, not a creditor. A buyer. For the boat. He stepped into the yard, running his hand along the hull, nodding appreciatively. My husband rushed out, eager to talk, but I was already there. Sir, I said firmly, the boat is not for sale. The man glanced between us, confused. My husband sputtered, Ignore her. It's mine. No, I said, pulling the paperwork from my bag, holding it where both of them could see. It's not. The buyer's eyes widened. He muttered an apology and backed away quickly, retreating to his car. The engine started, tires crunching gravel as he drove off. I turned back to my husband. His face was red, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. He couldn't. That night I spread every document across the kitchen table. Mortgage slips, bank statements, signed transfers. The paper trail of my silence, now weaponized into truth. He stood over them, eyes darting wildly, hands twitching at his sides. Do you see now? I asked quietly. Every piece you thought you controlled was built on me. My sacrifices. My choices. His breath hitched. He lowered himself into a chair, staring blankly at the pile. For the first time he had no words. I leaned closer, my voice ablade. You said I owed you everything. You were wrong. You owe me. And I'm collecting. The collection wasn't dramatic. There were no shouts, no slammed doors. Just the slow, suffocating realization that he had nothing left to stand on. I sold what needed selling. Closed what needed closing. The calls that once came for him began coming to me. And for once I answered. Calmly. Competently. He faded into the background the same way he had pushed me there for decades. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Carter paused one afternoon as I clipped roses by the porch. Haven't seen him around much, she said cautiously. I smiled, the sun warm on my face. He's adjusting. Her eyes lingered, but she didn't press. And I didn't explain. Some truths didn't need sharing. The boat stayed where it was, the tarp pulled tight, safe and steady. Sometimes I sat beside it in the evenings, listening to the quiet hum of crickets. It wasn't just wood and paint. It was proof. Proof that I had survived, that I had fought back, that I had taken what was mine and refused to let it be stolen. One night I whispered to it, almost like prayer, we made it. Inside he drifted through the house like a ghost. No more phone calls, no more friends, no more smirks. Just silence. Sometimes he looked at me with something like fear. Other times with something like regret. But he never spoke of the boat again. And I never asked him to. The day I finally locked the shoebox away for good, I felt lighter. Not because the secrets were buried, but because they were no longer secrets. They were truths laid bare, undeniable. I had carried him for too long. Now I carried myself. I sat at the kitchen table one last time, the papers cleared, the surface clean. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, the same as it always had. But the sound no longer mocked me. It marked something else now, freedom. I looked around the room, the quiet settling soft as a blanket. My life wasn't over. It was mine again. And as I leaned back, letting the weight finally slide from my shoulders, I whispered the words that had been waiting for years. This is the day I took back my life. If this story struck a chord with you, don't leave just yet. Subscribe now for more powerful revenge stories and emotional journeys. Because sometimes, the darkest stories hold the strongest truths.